I don't just talk about other people's stuff, I also make my own. Books in particular. To date, I have 4 books you can check out on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and the short story collection Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Hop on down to the description for Amazon links to all 4 books. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and I am back from G-Fest, back from a successful panel, and I finally finished straightening up after somebody who said he would just be kicking back and watching TV all weekend threw a raucous party in my absence.
For crying out loud, I've apologized like 15 times by now. What more do you want?
Finish cleaning the bathroom and then we'll talk. Anyway, I've got the place straightened up enough that I can sit down and get back to doing some episode reviews of Primal, because Season 2 has finally come. Yep, Genndy Tartakovsky's Primal is back for its 2nd season. And, in fact, it was an hour-long premiere, because we got 2 episodes in a row, Sea of Despair and Shadow of Fate. And, well, long story short, Primal is back and it hasn't missed a single beat. But what about the details? That's what I think people are really interested in. That's what I used to do in these unscripted reviews as Season 1 was premiering. So, let's get into it. So the first episode, Sea of Despair, picks up right where Season 1 left off. Literally. Spear and Fang are watching as Mira, the escaped slave girl, is being hauled back to Assyria, Mesopotamia, whatever that civilization winds up being revealed as. I'm guessing Assyria, but anyway, they're watching her and Spear immediately dives into the water and is trying to swim after her, but he just can't make it. I mean, it's the ocean, for heaven's sake. He can only swim so far. So the only option is for Spear and Fang to build a raft and sail out after her. Except they have no plan, they don't pack any provisions, they have no idea where they're going or how long it's going to take to get there. And as you can imagine, that leads to some problems because, well, Primal is set in a world where everything is dangerous, and Spear and Fang cannot go a single episode without having something happen. A large chunk of the episode is spent with the two just on a raft, out in the ocean, and there's some really interesting shots in there. Like, a lot of them are almost dreamlike in a way, because there are some shots at night where they don't even bother trying to draw the definition between the horizon where the ocean and sky meet. So, for all intents and purposes, there are some shots where it looks like Spear and Fang are just sort of drifting through empty space, through like the cosmos almost. And of course, this being the ocean, there's some weird creatures that you can find there. So there are like these bioluminescent jellyfish going by. There's a moment where a pod of whales shows up. And then, of course, by the end, we get a megalodon attack, and that serves as the sort of climactic battle. But overall, it is a really interesting one because this is the first time we've seen Spear and Fang out of their element. For the most part, they've been on the ground. They have been in the water before, but always in a sense where there was still land nearby. The second episode had the torrential flood that happened that brought them into the river and then a waterfall, but there was land there. They were going to get back to land eventually if they didn't drown or get eaten by snakes. There's been times that they've been near the water just to get fish in the first episode, in episode 5, but this is the first time where they are surrounded by it, where there is no option to go to land. And like I said, they don't have a plan. They just figured, we'll go forward and we'll find them. It can't be that far. Turns out to be very far. So they've got to figure out how they're going to make it, and surprisingly enough they do, in some pretty innovative ways. Whether it's just figuring out that they can snag flying fish out of the air, or figuring out some way to tag team an Archelon so they can have not just food but also shelter from the sun on their little makeshift raft. And even more interesting is that it shows just how in sync Spear and Fang are at this point. Like, over the course of the first season, we saw them build that trust, build that relationship, that back and forth where they know how to work together. But here, they really emphasize how they can figure each other out pretty much instantaneously at this point. Like, Spear is immediately, like, fully focused on getting Mira back right from the beginning. And he starts knocking down trees. When he figures out he can't swim, he starts knocking down trees because he intends to build a raft. He doesn't actually communicate this to Fang, and you get the sense that Fang maybe doesn't fully understand what Spear's intention is, but as she's watching him, she figures out, oh, well, if he's breaking down all of these trees, it must be for a reason, so I'm gonna help. And she goes right into it. Later, while they're on the raft and the currents and the wind stop moving them forward, Spear gets off. He's basically pushing the raft, kicking it, while Fang just lays there on top. And as you can imagine, that exhausts him, so eventually he comes out of it. He's laying on the raft, he's catching his breath, but the raft has stopped again. And again, without any need for direct communication, Fang just sort of goes to the edge of the raft where Spear originally was, which that shifting of weight does cause the raft to sort of upend a little, and Spear gets a little freaked out by that, but she dips her tail in the water and starts paddling them forward. Again, it's that idea that they are so well synchronized at this point that their cooperation is just automatic. That makes them such an interesting duo to see, and makes the second episode all the more harrowing, but we'll get to that in due time. Simultaneously, though, we also see that sometimes the lack of communication does lead to some conflict, but not the sort of conflict where they're going to be at each other's throats the whole time. Like, initially, Fang does not want to get on the raft. She's a little freaked out at being on something that is technically buoyant, but doesn't really trust it all the same. So Spear basically tricks her. He gets a bunch of grubs, piles them onto the raft, and Fang, being a T-Rex, just instantly thinks, ooh, food, gets on the raft, he pushes it out while she's chowing down, and once they are a good distance and Fang has actually finished her meal, she looks up, looks back at the shore, and then she roars at Spear like, you tricked me, you son of a... But that's as long as it lasts, and from that point on, they're just in it together as they always are. And boy, the final moments where there's that storm, everything just piles up at the end. There's a long stretch where they're not going through anything in particular. They're just sort of drifting. They can't really do anything other than catching that one giant turtle, the Archelon I mentioned. They're just sort of going wherever the current takes them. But then everything happens all at once. The flying fish appear, and at first it seems like, hey, we've got as much food as we want. And then the pterosaurs show up, which to somebody watching who knows what a basic thing about nature, the presence of the pterosaurs does mean there's land nearby, but there's no way to really process that at this point because the pterosaurs are attacking, and then the shark fin appears, and the megalodon becomes the threat. And yikes, what they go through trying to get away from that thing. It feels like they really went through it this time, but maybe that's mostly because, as mentioned, they're not in their element. seeing how they are able to take this thing down and knowing that they get battered and bruised, and I mean, it's Primal after all. You know in the back of your mind they're going to survive, but there is still that lingering sense of you don't know how they're going to survive. So that's where things get really interesting. And of course the episode ends on one of the a cliffhanger like worthy of that Rage of the Ape Men episode, where, you know, that episode was devastating because it seemed like Fang might not have made it. Well, the end of Sea of Despair, Fang wakes up on the beach alone, no sign of Spear anywhere, and she's running back and forth, roaring, looking for him, but he's nowhere to be seen, and it's like, oh no. This means they're separated now. The only reason they've come this far is because they're together. If they're separated, how are they going to make it? And that's where the second episode comes in. This time they didn't leave us in suspense for too long. Shadow of Fate shows us exactly what happened after they got separated, after they washed up on the shore, and this is the first time since the first episode where we have seen them truly apart. Like, there was a brief moment in Under the Blood Moon where Fang had to act on her own, and then of course there was the episode immediately following the Ape Men bit where Spear basically had to care for her while she was recovering and was doing that on his own, but she was still there technically. Here they are completely in different realms. And in fact, they are in realms you could argue are better suited to them. Spear gets picked up by a tribe of what appear to be early Celts. And, well, I mean, they're not like full-blown Braveheart characters, but you can tell there's like tartan in their clothes, they have the blue war paint, they're mostly red-haired, so you can tell that there's definitely a Celtic influence there. Meanwhile, Fang meets another Tyrannosaurus of a sort. It's not a T-Rex, but it's a different strain. And as far as I've seen at this point, it doesn't have a name. It's simply identified as a red dinosaur, even though it's mostly gray, but the head and different parts of it are red, so I'll just be calling him Red for this foreseeable future until an official name materializes, if it does. So we have them finding characters they can interact with while they are apart, and it's interesting to see how that happens, because at first they don't necessarily trust these other people. Spear, of course, cannot communicate with these Celts. They actually do speak, the Celtic guys do. The only one we know the actual name of is the Chief. I mean, I say name, he's simply identified as the Chief. But he's not speaking English. Again, this is one of those instances where Primal is predominantly told without language, but when a character does show up who speaks, it's not in a language that most people are going to understand. I believe this might be some form of like Old English, and when I say that, I don't mean like ye old English, these and thous and whatnot. I'm talking like really old English, the kind where if you were to listen to it, even someone who speaks fluent English would not understand it right off the bat. And it's probably not strictly that. I'm sure there are parts that I'm missing, but all the same, this is another example of a character who is speaking, but because he's not speaking in a dialect that most people would understand, you still have to actually watch the show. Most of the storytelling is still visual. But the point is, Spear can't really communicate with them, so at first he's thinking, great, I've been kidnapped again, more enemies. So he's initially on the run, he's on somewhere between offense and defense, where he's fighting back, but he's also trying to escape. And we just gradually see that the chief figures out how to convince him that he's among friends, for all intents and purposes. And as for Fang, meanwhile, she meets this other Tyrannosaur, and at first, she's thinking, this is just more competition for food, and I need to get away from him, I don't want anything to do with him. But as they spend more time together, this other Tyrannosaur just sort of doesn't leave her alone. Red eventually starts to kind of grow on Fang, and we see them start to engage in some weapons-grade dinosaur flirting. Like, that's the only way I can describe it. Especially when they encounter that one tree with fruit on it, but as they're eating it, they get intoxicated. And it's kind of amusing seeing drunk dinosaurs, let me tell you. We kind of get the sense that even though they're not really the same species, they could actually get along at least well enough to form some kind of a pack. And it's curious because for the first time, Spear and Fang have encountered creatures that don't want to kill them. That is an oddity in this series. And at around the halfway point, I was thinking, yes, finally these two have allies. They won't have to go with just themselves anymore. Except, wait a minute, this is Primal. Every time it seems like Spear and Fang have caught a break, the rug gets pulled out from under them. So it's only a matter of time before it all goes horribly wrong. And sure enough, in those final moments of the episode, Spear and Fang do finally make it back to each other, but at a tremendous cost. The finale, of course, has Fang and Red make it into this Celtic village, and Red, being a wild animal, he just sees an opportunity to get more food, of course. And Fang is originally on board as well until she sees Spear there. And then things get complicated because Fang kind of finds herself in the middle of this weird instance where she's trying to stop Red from killing people, but she's also trying to keep the Celts and Spear from killing Red, and at the same time, Spear is trying to keep the rest of the Celts from killing Fang, but Red is attacking him, so if he could figure out that Red and Fang somehow had a thing going, he doesn't really have the time to process it because he's still fighting for dear life. And boy, like, this is one of those times where you wish the characters could communicate, because that would solve it. That would mean they could say, okay, we're not enemies here. We're all technically on the same side, even if it's only because the two different sides got to know our main protagonists. But that's not an option. It's just got to play out the way it plays out. And unfortunately, Red just doesn't get it. The Celts, they do figure out that they should stop attacking. They should not interfere. But Red isn't so lucky. And that leads to such a tragic ending where Fang basically winds up being the one who kills him. Red could have potentially been a new mate for her. Even if he's a different strain, you could potentially theorize that they're both members of the Tyrannosaur family, so maybe they could have gotten together, started a new family. But because he's going after Spear, and Fang and Spear have something that's really deep going between them, Fang is left with no choice. And it hits hard. Like, the one thing I will say that took me out of the moment, not because it was a bad moment, but because I recognized it as a reference, was Fang's killing move is a reference to Gorosaurus. I am convinced. For those of you who do not know, Gorosaurus is a kaiju from the Godzilla series who is one of the few characters that just looks like a regular dinosaur. He doesn't necessarily have any mutation abilities to him, but one of his signature moves is that he can rear back on his tail and basically do a kangaroo kick. That's like one of the signature things about him. And that's essentially what Fang does. And when I saw that, my mind just briefly switched to, oh, Gorosaurus reference, before getting sucked back into the tragedy of it all. And, I mean, I want to say it is a reference. It's possible that they just went with that move because it seemed like the natural thing to do, but I've seen Genndy Tartakovsky's other work. I know he likes kaiju and tokusatsu. I have to believe he must have been referencing Gorosaurus here. But anyway, that's not really the point. The point is that Fang's heart is broken, and she's the one who dealt the killing blow, which makes it even worse. Like, she can't even get mad at Spear for killing her potential new boyfriend, because she's the one who did it to protect him. And what really makes this ending hit hard, like harder than it would have otherwise, is that it really drives home the fact that Spear and Fang are alone. Like I said, at first it seems like they found allies. At first it seems like maybe Red and the Celts will be able to help them somehow. But that's not an option. Fang winds up killing Red and is so distraught by this that she just wanders off all sullen, and Spear follows. It seems like the chief tries to stop him, but he's just like, nope, I have to go with her. And he's no longer part of that particular tribe anymore. It really hits hard because now we know that they can't really have allies. Or if they do wind up having allies, it means they have to separate. Which now has me dreading the conclusion, because I have a feeling like this must be foreshadowing. Like, this must somehow be hinting at what we're going to see at the end. Assuming that Season 2 is the actual finale, just think about it. Like, there will probably be a choice that has to be made, where Spear and Fang will either have to choose to stay together or go their separate ways. Assuming they both survive, it's possible one of them, or maybe even both of them, could die in the process. But let's assume for the moment that they do both make it to the end. Are they going to stick together? They can't really stick together without isolating themselves somehow. If Fang sticks with Spear and Spear stays with some kind of civilized tribe, that tribe is always going to view Fang as a potential threat, and that's going to cause tension. If Spear stays with Fang and joins her in the wild, he's always going to be fighting for his life, and Fang will never really be able to interact with other members of her species. If they stay together and reject both, they've still got each other, sure, but they'll essentially still be alone fighting against the world. That's got me thinking that the ending is gonna... Best case scenario, bittersweet ending is what we're looking at. And that's assuming that things somehow work out well. This is Primal after all. So, who knows? All I know is that Season 2 is off to a good start. And hoo boy, it's still going to be rough. I read some of the episode descriptions for what's to come. Sounds like there are big plans ahead. Like, I'll just see them and talk about them as they come. But for now, man, this was quite a way to start a season. And I'm glad it's back, let me tell you. Primal, as far as I'm concerned, is the best dinosaur fiction on the market right now. As much as I've defended Jurassic World, you can keep those movies, and Prehistoric Planet and anything else, if I had to choose between any other dinosaur work produced recently and Primal, I'm going with Primal. And I'm specifying dinosaurs, not kaiju necessarily, but Primal is just something special. Primal is true artistry. Primal is something that, if it really catches on, could change the animated landscape. But I mean, it's only got such a big audience because it's clearly aimed at adults, and we live in a culture where animation is still viewed as being for kids. Even though Primal certainly is not. It's like this 1 million years BC by way of splatterpunk story, but I really hope it does have some kind of positive influence. For now, though, it is what it is, and it's off to quite a beginning. I think I'm ready to face what comes next, but I'm also bracing myself for it. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni viewer signing off. Congratulations, you reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to consider supporting us on Patreon. Of course, the other way to support us is to go to Amazon and check out our books: Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Also check the description for links to DeviantArt and other platforms we operate. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.